While grunge music was waning in popularity by the mid-90s, a new subgenre of rock called post-grunge sprouted up. One of those early bands was British group Bush. Lambasted by critics as simply being a Nirvana clone, the group scored 5 top 10 hits and 3 number 1 singles on their debut album, and they went on to have one of the biggest records of 1995. In today's video, let's talk about the album and the backlash the band endured, some of which were also due to the band's business decisions. Compared to the upbringings of a lot of alternative American artists, Bush leader Gavin Rossdale had a pretty posh life. He grew up in northwestern London. He had a middle-class upbringing, being the son of a doctor who had a lot of politically connected patients. Some of these patients were part of the African National Congress. His mother, meanwhile, was a model. Rossdale attended the prestigious prep school Westminster, and he initially wanted to have a career in soccer. But that was quickly dashed when he suffered a career-ending injury. His parents divorced when he was just 11, and he was raised by his father and aunt. By the age of 17, he left Westminster School and started his first band, Midnight. All the members of Bush had older siblings who were teenagers in the late 70s when the punk explosion was at its peak. They were all exposed to groups like The Clash and Sex Pistols, with Rossdale telling the LA Times, "Growing up in England, we were all punks in our own way. When I was 12, I had this spiky bleach blonde hair." But when people weren't looking, he admitted in a separate interview going and listening to David Bowie, something that was pretty frowned upon at the school he was attending. Rossdale was a late arrival to playing music, not picking up the guitar till he was 19. He told the Chicago Tribune, "I left home at 17, was this wandering soul at 19, and decided to become a singer. A very purposeful decision to be the singer because I wanted to be rich and famous. It was then I decided I wanted to be on stage, craving the attention of thousands of people." Rossdale supported himself with a variety of odd jobs while playing in a series of bands in the 80s, including that first outfit I previously mentioned, a pop act named Midnight. Surprisingly, the band got signed and even put out a few singles and opened for the likes of Big Country and Cyndi Lauper. But that's about as far as they got. Rossdale told Rolling Stone, "We got signed way too young in the mid-80s when everyone was throwing all this money around. We weren't developed and we didn't deliver. So as far as the A&R community in London was concerned, I was soiled." Rossdale soon left Midnight and played in several other bands, but decided to change his life up, telling Rolling Stone, "My life was too safe in London, so I thought going to America would help my career. When I got there, I came to the conclusion that there was nothing to my life. No one I was with personally, no family ties." By 1991, Rossdale relocated to California for about half a year. Friends back home helped him set up accommodations, and he made money working on music videos as a production assistant. He also discovered bands from the Pacific Northwest, singling out Alice in Chains, as he told KROQ here.
Well, rock music for me, for just like what was possible. If you weren't going to be in a hair metal band,
Yeah.
where those guys sang, I didn't feel connected to them. But something about Man in the Box, it had all that post-punk and that sort of really just an amazing sound. And that just, I don't know, it just set a template for so many of us that we're all in debt to that song. And I hear it every night because he's on the road with me now.
The high point of Rossdale's life in Los Angeles was seeing another Pacific Northwest band, Nirvana, perform at the Roxy in LA, while the low point was crashing at the place of an ex-girlfriend of 5 years. The same ex-girlfriend whose boyfriend, Jake Scott, funny enough, went on to direct Bush's video for Comedown. The early days of Bush dated back to November of '91 when Bryan Adams played Wembley Stadium. At that show, Rossdale met a guitarist named Nigel Pulsford. They soon bonded over their shared musical tastes, with Rossdale telling Rolling Stone, "When he mentioned Pixies, I knew that was it." Rossdale added in a separate interview to Tulsa World, "One of the most important records of my life was Surfer Rosa. And if you listen to the end of Debaser from Doolittle, then you'll hear the whole riff of Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit." Pulsford, for his part, had played in a band named King Blank, who was signed to British indie label Beggar's Banquet. Pulsford and Rossdale's first project together was named Future Primitive, which was a little different than the type of music Bush were known for. An English record executive told Rolling Stone they weren't what they are today. They were a little like the more commercial side of NXS. But I'll say this for Gavin, he wasn't going to be held back by people in London who resented his looks or his money or his history. Rossdale, for his part, also claimed to Howard Stern that another issue a lot of London A&R people had with him was his voice.
When I came up, the one thing, I could always get like studio demo time in London, but I never could get signed, and my voice was always used as the reason why I failed.
Is that
was
right?
Like, yeah, they say his voice is not very good, can't sing, and it's not that funny.
Fred was one of those people.
Fred,
How can they say you can't sing?
because, you know,
'Cause everyone's a critic.
And I once in my band, just before I began Bush, I thought trying to be really inclusive with the band I was in, and we walked up on stage, and I was thinking, you know, in the spirit of the band, what should I say to him? Hey, buddy, is there anything I should look out for? He goes, yeah, watch the high notes.
Great, that'll give you a lot of confidence.
Bush's success wouldn't have happened without a man named Dave Dorrell, a British man whose career began in the 70s. He'd established a fanzine which saw him befriend the members of Sex Pistols. The following decade, he became a writer for New Musical Express, or NME, and after his magazine gig, he became a DJ and at one point was actually hired by MTV Europe to work on sound collages, one of which turned into the hit single Pump Up the Volume for Mars in 1987. The track marked a significant milestone in the development of music sampling and British acid house music. Dorrell and Rossdale knew each other from the London club scene in the mid-80s. While they were friends, the idea of collaborating didn't really happen until Rossdale moved to California and their paths crossed again. Dorrell was in LA to remix Tina Turner's 70s era song Nutbush City Limits, a song that Rossdale, interestingly enough, was working on as a video assistant. Up until this point, Rossdale had only written songs with other people. He was hesitant to write on his own, lacking the confidence, but he finally decided to take a stab at writing on his own, and the first song he came up with was Comedown. Dorrell would tell Rolling Stone, "We seemed destined to work with each other. When I next saw Gavin in London, he had the basis of Comedown using a Billy Cobham drum loop. It seemed to fuse elements that excited me because of my musical history." Dorrell soon became Bush's manager. Rossdale and Pulsford quickly added bassist Dave Parsons and drummer Robin Goodrich. Goodrich cut his teeth playing in punk bands as a teenager and soon became an electronics engineer. He also became familiar with Bush through Dorrell, who he worked with, recalling to Rolling Stone, "I did one of those classic Keith Moon things at one of their gigs in London. I got drunk and went backstage to tell them what I thought of their drummer. I think I scared Nigel." The quartet soon called themselves Bush, a name which was inspired by Shepherd's Bush, a district in West London. Once Goodrich was in the group, his day job was driving an ice cream truck. So at night, he used that same truck to transport the band's equipment to gigs. The other members, including Rossdale, painted houses, and he even used to thin out the paint to save money for musical gear. Another member of the band delivered sushi as a day job. Bush recorded a demo and shopped it around London, but they didn't have any takers. As Rossdale told the Orlando Sentinel, Bush wasn't part of what he referred to as the cliquey London music scene, adding to ultimate classic rock. Of course, nothing ever happened, and they, referring to the London A&R men, never shared any drugs with us. They didn't buy us any drinks, and we didn't go on holidays with them. They didn't take us out with the expense accounts. I was used to being a bit of an urchin, a bit of an extra. I couldn't get a break. That was it, and I was used to it. Bush's fortunes soon changed, though, when a British radio producer tipped off an American record executive named Rob Kahane. The Bush track Honky Manchild was getting some airplay on a BBC Radio 1 program that featured unsigned acts. Kahane, up until this point, had managed British star George Michael. Kahane saw Bush perform on the British TV show The Word and heard 5 of their songs, all of which ended up being huge singles from their first album. Then Kahane showed up in the UK at the studio where the band was working. Pulsford recalled to the Arizona Republic, "We were recording our demo at a London studio when the label had Rob Kahane pulled up in a limo. We all thought, oh great, here's a record label guy. He'll feed us a line, then he'll be off. It wasn't until he kept showing up that we realized he was selling himself to us. As Rossdale saw it, he was following in the footsteps of his heroes Pixies telling louder sound. When the opportunity came to get that deal in America at Trauma, I couldn't think of anything else but the Pixies signing to 4AD, and I thought, well, they'd come to England, so it, let's go there. Kahane had signed the band to his label Trauma Records in 1993. Trauma had a distribution deal with Disney-owned Hollywood Records. Bush now had to decide whether to record their debut in America or back home. Despite being more attached to the American music scene at the time, Rossdale and company opted to stay in the UK, telling the Orange County Register, I just wanted to stay with my dog and have my dog really. I wanted to make the record and have my dog around. That dog, Winston, was 5 at the time, and he's actually featured on the inner sleeve of the group's first record, 16 Stone, with Rossdale adding, but on a more serious side, I thought we could get lost in the American sound. As a result, Bush opted to work with British producers Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley, who would make them sound more British. They were also chosen because of their work with Elvis Costello, with Rossdale singling out Shipbuilding.
With all the will in the world, darling.
Rossdale told the Orange County Register, Elvis Costello is so talented and good that he'd only want to work with someone pretty cool. Pulsford's dad and Rossdale's stepfather died during the recording of their first album, and this further reinforced the band's decision to not record in America. In doing press for the album, Rossdale told the Orange County Register that the heart of the record's message was anti-sexist, adding the importance of mind and soul over how far you can kick a football or how much beer you can drink, with Pulsford adding, we've been influenced by the musical trends of the past few years. We think the best music has come out of the United States, to be honest. The band discussed how dance music back home seemed to be dominating the charts, while also singling out acts like PJ Harvey and Oasis as some of their more favorite homegrown acts.
50 for Queen and 50 rising. You bend over, cast. You're the same as me. We see things I'll never see.
The album also tackles subjects like war with the track Bomb that deals with Rossdale's own experience with the Irish Republican Army. He told American Songwriter, where I grew up in North London, there were these bombed out shop centers and buses and people died, and it was the real thing. Bush completed the recording of their debut record titled 16 Stone by early '94, handing it over to Trauma by April. The album was named after a studio engineer the group worked with. A stone is a British unit of weight equal to 14 pounds, so the engineer they worked with weighed 224 pounds, hence the album's name. Goodrich added that the engineer himself didn't know he inspired the album's title, but life was going to throw a curveball at the band. Hollywood Records was owned by Disney, and Disney executive Frank G. Wells, who was a big backer of Kahane and Bush in the early days, tragically died in a helicopter crash. It was following his death that the executives at Hollywood Records had no interest in releasing Bush's debut album, and so the band lost their distribution deal. The album sat in limbo for nearly half a year, with Rossdale telling Kerrang, someone there famously said, referring to Hollywood Records, not only are there no singles on 16 Stone, there are no album tracks either. So for the next several months, Rossdale went back to painting, and he told Howard Stern he painted 11 dentist offices in West London, and they were all the same color, magnolia. By the fall of '94, Kahane had sent an advance copy of 16 Stone to the LA radio station KROQ, who immediately took a liking to the song Everything Zen. The track includes references to Jane's Addiction song Ted Just Admit It, with the following line, there's no sex in your violence. There's also a reference to Alice in Chains' song Wood, with the lyric try to see it once my way.
Something we can eat. Maybe find another lover.
The song premiered on KROQ Jed the Fish's Afternoon Drive as the catch of the day in November of '94. The band soon headed over to LA once the song took off on KROQ to play the Magnolia on Santa Monica. The power went out 3 times during that show, and Rossdale felt embarrassed and worried that Bush had possibly blown their one shot at success. But after the gig, Kevin Weatherly, the program director at KROQ, came backstage and told Rossdale and company they were the real deal and not to worry about the power going out. The Orlando Sentinel reported that once the gig was over, Rossdale, funny enough, got on a plane, headed back home to, I'm not kidding you, finish off a painting contract. Interscope Records soon heard the song blow up in KROQ, and it was the same month Rossdale met with both Jimmy Iovine and Ted Field from the label. Bush and Trauma Records now had a distributor who had the resources to really get the album out there. I also want to point out that Disney-owned Hollywood Records was the laughingstock of the music industry during the 90s, as they had over $150 million pumped into the company and they really had nothing to show for it. Due to the success of Everything Zen, the label moved up the release of 16 Stone from January of 95 to just before Christmas. The band joked that they didn't even have a press photo by the time the song gained traction on KROQ. I also want to note that while a lot of publications claim that Everything Zen was the breakout song from the record, the Orlando Sentinel also reported that KROQ started playing Little Things as well. Rossdale revealed to Kerrang how much of a life-changing moment writing Everything Zen was, recalling, "Writing Everything Zen felt like a seismic moment for me. I guess I'd written enough songs by that point that I was inevitably going to start writing some better ones. As with all of the earliest Bush songs, it started with me and my drum machine. I'd record the riff on a cassette tape and then walk around Hyde Park playing it in one ear and trying to sing melodies and lyrics to go along with me. Writing the lyric, "Should I fly to Los Angeles, find my asshole brother," felt like a change in my approach. That incendiary lyric immediately felt like it had more impact than anything else I'd previously written.
Should I fly to Los Angeles? Find my asshole brother.
The opening riff to the song has also been compared to Neil Young's iconic tune Rockin' in the Free World.
Kiss in the rear view. So boy, you're to blame.
Everything Zen peaked at number 2 on the alternative airplay chart and number 5 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. Of course, MTV only helped further push album sales. The band cut a video for Everything Zen in the middle of November of '94 with Alice in Chains' Peter Gabriel and U2 producer Matt Mahurin. The video soon landed in MTV's Buzzbin and on the show Alternative Nation by December of '94. The second single and the Nirvana-influenced song Little Things was issued in May of '95. The song dealt with Rossdale trying not to let the little things bring him down in life. The video was once again directed by Mahurin, with the song peaking at number 4 on the alternative chart and number 6 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. The third single, which was the first song Rossdale wrote by himself, Comedown, was written about an ex-girlfriend of his. He told an interviewer, "I like the idea of euphoria, but having that euphoria has a come down. It's inside your brain and just says, I'm having the greatest time and I don't want it to stop. But most of the time, people lose that zone."
There is no blame, only shame. When you beg, just come.
Comedown was the first single to top the rock charts, topping the alternative airplay chart and peaking at number 2 on the US mainstream rock tracks chart. It was also a crossover hit, peaking at number 30 on the Hot 100 chart.
I don't wanna come back down from this cloud. Take me up.
And the fourth single, Glycerine, also topped the alternative airplay chart and went to number 4 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. It was also a crossover hit, peaking at number 28 on the Hot 100 chart.
And our days go by.
But the band wasn't done just yet. The final single, Machine Head, went on to peak at number 4 on both the US alternative airplay and mainstream rock tracks chart, and was another crossover hit, peaking at number 43 on the Hot 100 chart.
Got a bloodstream head, spell out the rest. Green to
But it wasn't just MTV and rock radio that helped push album sales of 16 Stone. Some retail music stores, including Camelot and Musicland, had video music kiosks called New Music Review. These kiosks, located near the front of the store, allowed customers to cycle through 20 videos from the hottest artists at the time. Billboard interviewed the marketing director for Cellophane Square, a now defunct record store in Seattle, who told the magazine that once Machine Head was added to the video kiosks, their store saw spikes in 16 Stone sales.
Tied to the wheel, my fingers gotta feel
When it was all said and done, 16 Stone sold over 6 million copies in America. But there was another element of Bush's success, something that's often overlooked: their lack of competition. 1995 was a light year for alternative rock bands, with Goodrich telling Rolling Stone, "Kids split their dollars up between whatever's available, and we weren't competing with many of the major bands," pointing to Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Nirvana. Bush's success also followed a similar formula to other European acts at the time, but with one fundamental difference, with Rossdale telling the LA Times, bands like the Cranberries and Radiohead put records out in England first, but they weren't successful, so they had to come to America to find success. In contrast, our record deal was based in the San Fernando Valley. Rob Kahane offered us a situation with full creative control, so we went with it. 16 Stone didn't even come out in the UK until February of 95, several months after Bush debuted in America. Bush also seemed to struggle in the UK with the independent writing in 1995. They played to a crowd of 60,000 in Washington, D.C. A month later, they were in front of 150 people in a Birmingham English pub. Not only did the band struggle to gain a foothold in their home country, but they were also lambasted in the press. The band hypothesized that one reason for the backlash was that the band had success in America first, rather than in the UK. In fact, The Independent wrote about Bush in the late 90s. In America, Rossdale is known as the British guy who sells millions of records. In Britain, up until now, he's been known as that British guy who sells millions of records in America. But not everyone in America loved Bush. The quartet received a lot of backlash and comparisons to the bands from Seattle. Rolling Stone even did a whole piece on the band in 1996 titled Nirvana Wannabes, something the band brushed aside, but there were a lot of similarities that you couldn't deny. Rossdale dated or was at least friends with Courtney Love, he dealt with chronic stomach pain like Kurt Cobain, and Bush later worked with Steve Albini, who produced Nirvana's In Utero. Add to that list that Rossdale would sing words like Contagious and Nevermind on Bush's second record, and even Nirvana drummer Dave Grohl saw the similarities himself, as he told MTV.
As it happens, a number of critics have suggested that Everclear sounds a little bit like Grohl's old band, Nirvana.
Someone says that, but I don't hear that. Like, not as much as when I listen to Bush, I think that, to me, sounds like Nirvana. And it's hard for me to hear bands, everyone says, oh, they sound like Nirvana, and I'll listen to them and I'm like, I don't think so. Bush is one band that I think really sounds like Nirvana. So
There was even several interviews where Bush was referred to as the English Nirvana. Guitarist Nigel Pulsford told the Arizona Republic, what Nirvana proved was that guitars weren't out and long gone, and it wasn't all dance music, so they opened up the guitar world again. Reuters even summarized the criticisms against Bush that critics had, and they were as follows. They were considered corporate grunge, they didn't have a diehard fan base, and they had no credibility. Rossdale told Reuters, obviously there's going to be a faction that says, oh, I hate him because they're successful. But judging from where they came from and what they've done, maybe someone might say, that's all right, it's totally cool, they've worked hard for it. He added that Trauma Records didn't try to shape the band's sound. Rossdale, meanwhile, added to spin, I didn't teach myself to sing a certain way. You can't manufacture that, you know. That Seattle comparison is really such a lazy one. If you've got loud guitars and singing isn't screechy high, it's almost inevitable that you'd be connected with bands like Nirvana, who've done so much for music after all. Even radio station program directors pointed out the similarities to the Pacific Northwest, with Billboard interviewing the assistant program director for New York's Q104.3 station, who said, everyone thinks they're a Seattle band, but they're from England, which makes it even cooler. The press, of course, also focused on Rossdale's good looks, something which only further hurt the band's credibility. Rolling Stone famously wrote a profile on the band, which I previously mentioned, with a beefcake photo of him, shirtless with the question, why won't anyone take Gavin Rossdale seriously? Bush's camp was actually pretty upset about the photo, and then you had Spin Magazine do a piece on the band the same year with the headline, Bush, don't hate them because he's beautiful. Their manager told the LA Times that the band had no say in which photo was used for the cover, hoping that Rolling Stone would instead use a shot showing all four members. Rolling Stone responded saying that no one forced the Bush frontman to pose that way. Rossdale summarized his anger towards the press, telling the Chicago Tribune, I'm seen by the press as a dilute little wanker. I should just send a cardboard cutout to sit through the interviews, preferably shot in good light to accent the cheekbones everyone likes to write about so much. No one in 3 years has said to my face, you f***ing suck, but every time I turn around, there's a carving knife stuck in my back. So who was your typical Bush fan in the mid-90s? Well, the LA Times published a profile in 1995 that read, "While their appeal to teenage girls would go without question to anyone who isn't blind, the musicians proudly insist that the audiences they draw are about half male. We get an interesting spread of ages as well," Rossdale says. "We got flowers from a couple in their 50s the other day with a note saying, 'Hi kids, we thought Zen was a bit vulgar when we first heard it, but then we bought the album and read your lyrics, and they were very interesting.' In just 8 months since their debut record came out, the band went from being an opening act in clubs to headlining arenas filling places that held 8 to 10,000 people. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Story sticker.